Hey there, lovely soul. Welcome back to Noah's Stories. How's your heart doing today? Feeling a little dreamy? Or in the mood for something intense? Something that lingers beneath the skin? Because today's tale, it's not your usual love story. It begins in a cathedral, ancient and gold-lit, where a bride walks down the aisle wrapped in silk and silence. A man waits at the altar, but he never looks at her. This isn't a union of hearts. It's a contract sealed in marble and cold ambition. And she, Isla Romano, was that bride. The fabric of Isla Romano's wedding gown clung to her like a second skin, layers of silk and lace that hugged her body with the weight of both an embrace and a chain. Her long, flowing train glided silently behind her, brushing the polished marble floor of Santa Croce Cathedral with a whisper soft enough to haunt. Every step echoed faintly, a lonely sound swallowed by gilded arches and shimmering mosaics that lined the ancient walls. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the hushed murmurs of guests seated in rows of crimson velvet, draped in haute couture and glistening with jewels. They didn't need to say it out loud. Everyone knew. This wasn't a fairy tale. There was no love in the vows waiting to be exchanged. Each guest, with their cool glances and too perfect posture, understood. Isla wasn't walking into a dream, but into a deal. Her father had orchestrated every piece. This union was a currency, traded for influence, alliances, and quiet power. Isla herself was just another clause in a multi-million-dollar contract. A stunning object, wrapped in lace and silk, brought forth to fulfill a strategic agreement. And at the end of the aisle, he was waiting, eyes like stone, heart untouched. Julien Devereux. The name alone conjured visions of absolute power and unimaginable wealth. At 40, he was the heir to a global financial empire, his influence stretching from Manhattan's skyline to secluded alpine estates that whispered exclusivity. And now he was Isla's husband. He didn't look at her, not once. His bespoke suit, tailored by master hands in Milan, traced the lines of his tall frame, its black fabric a stark contrast to his sun-kissed skin. A skin that spoke of summers spent on private yachts and retreats hidden among mountaintops. His posture was immaculate, rigid like a general standing at the edge of battle, shoulders squared, spine unbending. His face was all angles and symmetry, a chiseled jawline, an aristocratic nose, and eyes darker than onyx. Yes, he was beautiful, devastatingly so, but there was no warmth to him, no flicker of emotion in the depths of his gaze. Julien didn't look like a groom on the brink of a lifelong promise. He looked like a man facing a sentence, unmoved, resigned, and utterly untouched by the moment. Isla's heart didn't flutter, it pounded, loud and terrified. This wasn't nervous excitement, it was dread, pure, choking, inevitable. The air inside the cathedral was thick with incense and unspoken expectation. She felt like a defendant at her own sentencing, and the man beside her, the silent judge who wouldn't even glance her way. When the priest finally spoke, "Julien Devereux, do you take Isla Romano to be your lawful wedded wife?" Time fractured. A pause. Heavy. Suffocating. As if the whole world held its breath. She turned to him, searching, praying foolishly for a sign, a flicker of hesitation, a sliver of mercy, that he would turn away and free her from the cage she never chose. But his voice came, deep and unyielding, like steel. Yes. The word fell from his lips like a verdict. Not a vow. It was colder than marble, final, deliberate, detached. Now it was her turn. Her mouth went dry, her throat burned with unsaid pleas. Every part of her screamed, "No!" But all that escaped was a breathless, fragile surrender. Yes. The platinum ring slid onto her finger, icy and precise. Not a symbol of love, not a bond of souls, just another clause in the contract already sealed. When the priest finally said, "You may now kiss the bride," Isla felt her heart stop. For the first time that day, Julien turned to face her. His gaze hit her like a physical force, sharp, cold, appraising. There was no spark, no tenderness, just the stare of a man evaluating a rare object before deciding if it was worth owning. He leaned in, slowly, deliberately. His lips brushed her forehead, featherlight, barely there. It wasn't a kiss, it was an obligation, a hollow gesture, meant to satisfy the expectant eyes behind them. Then he pulled away, from her, from the moment, as if she'd never been there at all. Isla stood frozen. A breath escaped her trembling lips, but he didn't notice. Or maybe, he just didn't care. As the black speedboat drifted away into the night that slowly settled over the Arno River, Isla sat beside Julian, feeling as though she were slipping into a world where words no longer existed. No one spoke. Only the soft hum of the engine and the golden lights of Florence, dancing on the river like fallen stars, kept them company. Julian sat less than a meter away, yet the distance between them felt as vast as an ocean. One of his hands rested firmly on the wheel, his eyes fixed straight ahead, not once turning toward her. Isla sat stiffly, her wedding dress clinging to her like a foreign layer of skin. Every fold of fabric, every piece of lace, once radiant under the ceremony lights, now felt cold, heavy, and confining. There were no blessings, no smiles exchanged after the ceremony, only silence. The boat pulled into a private dock. Before them stood an ancient palazzo, as if it had been lifted straight out of a Renaissance painting. Moss-covered stone walls, arched windows overlooking the quiet river, soft golden light glowing from within. Isla lifted her gaze to the building. This was where she would live now, at least according to the agreement. Inside, the space was bathed in warm light from grand chandeliers that sparkled overhead, but not a trace of warmth could be found. Everything was too perfect, too controlled, too much like Julian. They walked through a hallway of polished marble. Every step Isla took echoed behind her like a quiet, sorrowful rhythm. Julian walked ahead, flawless in posture, not a single wasted movement. Isla followed behind, like someone lost in a palace that didn't belong to her. Then he stopped. Without turning around, without a single glance, he said in a tone as calm as it was emotionless, "Your room is at the end of the hall." Just one sentence, sharp as a blade. No harshness, no insult, just a dismissal so cold it felt cruel. Isla stood still, feeling as though the ground beneath her was beginning to shift. She stared at his retreating figure, shoulders squared, footsteps steady, never looking back. He hadn't chosen her, hadn't looked at her, and yet, now she belonged to him, like land transferred in silence. And somehow, that hurt more than hatred. And somehow, that hurt more than any insult ever could. The room Isla had been directed to was vast and breathtaking, yet it made her feel impossibly small. Persian rugs stretched across the floor, golden tapestries lined the walls, and a massive bed covered in pristine white silk sheets sat at the center like a throne. Immaculate, untouched, unwelcoming. She stood beside it, fingers still hovering over the zipper of her heavy wedding gown. Drawing in a shaky breath, Isla peeled it off, as if shedding a second skin that had never belonged to her. The thin fabric of her nightdress brushed against her body, and she felt exposed. Not just physically, but in every way that mattered. Climbing into the bed, she pulled the covers up to her chin, clinging to them like a fragile shield against the emptiness threatening to consume her. But before her thoughts could even begin to settle, the door creaked open. Julian stood in the doorway. His jacket was gone, his tie loosened, the top buttons of his shirt undone, revealing a sliver of tan skin. The corridor light cast shadows across his face, sharp lines along his cheekbones, jaw like chiseled stone. But it was his eyes that made her breath hitch. For the first time, they burned with something unspoken, something that froze her in place. He stepped inside, no rush, no sound. Every movement thickened the air around her. Isla's fingers gripped the sheets, her heart racing uncontrollably. Julian stopped at the edge of the bed. His gaze held her captive, intense and searching, like she was a riddle he hadn't yet solved. "You should be asleep," he said, his voice low and rough, like stones rolling through deep water. Isla swallowed. "You should too." Silence. It stretched between them, charged and heavy. Then his mouth twitched. Barely. Not a smile, a signal. Cold. Predatory. Like a wolf who had just found what it was looking for. Isla didn't move. Every muscle in her body was tense as Julian stood this close, his presence stretching to fill the entire room. His eyes locked onto hers. Dark, unreadable, and whatever fragile walls she had built since entering this place, they began to crumble under the weight of that gaze. She should speak. She should demand to know why he was here after casting her aside so effortlessly. But her throat was dry. The words dissolved before they ever reached her lips. He stood at the edge of the bed, far too close. His shadow fell over her like a heavy curtain. His scent, woody, warm, expensive, wrapped around her, making her heartbeat stumble. "You're scared," he murmured, his voice low and deliberate, as if savoring each syllable. "That intrigues me." Her lips parted to protest, to deny what was so painfully true, but no sound came out. He was right. She was scared, but not in the way that made her want to run. No, this fear was different, more dangerous. She didn't know if it was his power or if it was simply him, and worse, she didn't know which one she wanted more. That moment. Tense, heavy, silent, stretched out like time itself had stopped. Julian didn't move. Neither did Isla. And yet something between them shifted, something alive, sparking quietly in the thick air. Then he spoke. "I never wanted this marriage." She had known that. She'd felt it from the moment she stepped into the cathedral. Still, hearing it now, raw and unfiltered, made her chest tighten. "I know," she replied softly, her voice fragile but steady. Julian tilted his head, eyes never leaving hers. Then, in a voice just above a whisper, breath warm between them, he said, "But now I want you, not because I should, not because they told me to, but because I can't stop." The world tilted. Those words, simple, quiet, landed like a thunderclap in her soul. It wasn't about the deal. It wasn't obligation. It was her. He wanted her. And in his eyes, for the first time, Isla didn't see a stranger. She saw truth. She saw a man who, despite every wall he'd built, had cracked. And in that crack, there was something real. And she realized her own walls had fallen long ago. Isla felt it the moment everything shifted. Julian was no longer the distant man towering in silence and power. He was here, now, before her, breath uneven, eyes ablaze, and his voice no longer issuing commands, but something far more dangerous. "You're mine, Isla," he whispered. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She could have stepped away, could have denied it, but her body had chosen long ago. No more fear, no more hesitation. Only truth. She already belonged to him. The first rays of morning sunlight slipped through the sheer curtains, spilling gently across the white silk sheets like a quiet whisper. Isla stirred awake in a room that still felt foreign, but no longer frightening. Everything was still like the night before. But now the silence wasn't cold. It was calm, fragile, peaceful. Julian lay beside her. For the first time, he didn't look like marble. He looked human. Morning light softened the hard lines of his face. A shadow of stubble darkened his jaw. His bare chest rose and fell beneath the silk. In sleep, he looked different, unguarded, uncontrolled, almost vulnerable. Isla shifted, turning to face him, letting herself watch him in the hush of morning. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, a trace of regret, a flicker of emotion, or maybe she just wanted to remember this image forever. But what surprised her most was the absence of fear. He moved. Not fully awake, just a small unconscious movement, his arm reaching out, fingers finding her waist. As though in his sleep he already knew she was supposed to be there. Isla's breath caught. She didn't know what to do with the gesture, this strange, effortless intimacy that melted her edges. But she didn't pull away. She let it happen. In fact, she inched closer, so slowly it felt like breathing. Julian opened his eyes. That first look made her heart skip. No coldness, no armor, just him. Real, unguarded, seeing her. "Good morning," he murmured, voice low, husky, raw, almost tender. Isla only nodded, a quiet smile touching her lips, barely there, as soft as sunlight on skin. No words, no explanations. They had crossed the line. There was no going back. And in that still moment, Isla knew whatever was beginning between them, it was real. She didn't know when it happened. Maybe when he returned. Maybe the moment their eyes met beneath the cathedral's dome. But now, Isla understood one thing. She was no longer alone. And neither was he. In their tangled breaths, in the way his hand gripped her waist, in the heat of his touch, there was something wild, something uncontainable. No more contracts, no more walls. Just two souls, no longer running, not quite lovers, not yet free, but maybe, for the first time, choosing each other. The sound of sparrows chirping filled the morning air as Isla descended the marble staircase. Soft sunlight kissed each step, painting the old villa in golden warmth. She wore a pale ivory silk dress, simple, elegant, left for her in the wardrobe the night before. Back then, it had felt like a costume for a contract-bound bride. Now, it meant something else. She stepped into the garden and saw him waiting. Julian sat at a white stone table nestled under olive trees. Morning light threaded through his hair, revealing hints of honey brown. Before him, a quiet breakfast was laid out. Toasted bread, soft boiled eggs, orange marmalade, and fresh coffee. Isla hesitated. Julian looked up. Their eyes met. He didn't say anything, just gestured gently to the seat across from him. She sat. Silence stretched at first. Only the soft clink of silverware and the whisper of breeze through the leaves, but this silence was different. It wasn't cold, it felt like two people waiting to speak without forcing it. Julian broke it first. "Did you sleep okay?" A simple question, but in this context, it felt like a bridge. Isla nodded. Strangely, yes. It felt unfamiliar, but calm. He didn't smile, but something in his gaze softened. A breath passed. Then, he poured her coffee, the motion smooth, almost instinctive. "I don't know how to begin," he admitted, eyes on the table. "I'm not good at soft things." She looked at him, really looked. "I don't need soft," she said. "I just need honest." Julian met her gaze, fully this time. "I never thought I'd care about anything beyond control, but last night, you made me question that." Isla's heart skipped. She didn't reply right away. Instead, she looked down at her hands resting in her lap, then back at him, her voice steady, sure. "Then show me who you really are." Julian nodded, slowly, like a promise, and somewhere in that sun-drenched silence, a story neither of them expected was just beginning.